So first of all, let me just say thank you, all of you. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I'm really interested to hear your thoughts. And in fact, as we go through this, if there's any questions at all, even if it's about something I said that you may not have understood, or if it's just about the theory or whatnot involved, please feel free to ask at any time throughout. So that I'm perfectly comfortable with that. PeerScholar originally was a tool that we developed for our class, which was it's a kind of an extreme class. It's 1,900 students that I teach at a time. I see the eyes wincing. Literally, we teach in a lecture hall of about 500, videotaped. Students can either attend the lectures personally, or they can watch the lectures later that day online. So it's their choice. So it ends up being this very big class, and the critical question for us is, how can we, given this size of class, still give students the experience we think they need to become what we want to call scholars? So let me unpack that to begin with. I often say as an educator, there's two tasks we have. We can kind of think of what our job is having two parts. One part is to teach the subject, whatever that subject may be, math, history, etc. So we can call that content. But the other part is to teach our students the cognitive skills they need to work with information well. So actually, let's kind of just jump through some of this. Often these are encapsulated in learning outcomes, so there are things like critical thinking. The problem with content now is that there's too much of it. It's everywhere. Some of it is really good, some of it's not very good. So a critical skill our students have to learn is how to analyze and evaluate anything, including content. So we have to teach them how to do that. Creative thinking. This is where all innovation comes from. If the goal of our university system is to produce students that come up with new, creative, innovative ideas, we have to at some point teach them how to think creatively. Communication. You can have the best analyses or the best ideas in the world. If you cannot communicate them effectively to others, then they die in your head. They're useless. So you need those good communication skills. And I always like to highlight with communication. Often when we talk about communication, we think of what I'm doing right now. Putting out communication, expressive communication. But a vital other component of communication is receptive communication, or what I like to call shut up and listen. We have to teach our students how every now and then to shut up, listen to some idea, evaluate it, think about it. That's a skill as well, and a skill that many students are lacking. So communication has those two facets. Yeah, go ahead, Dwayne. I'm getting used to having this now. Collaboration. In the modern world, it's very hard to do anything on your own. You guys are here as a collaborative group, learning together. We all know that really good things happen when we put people together. So we want to teach our students how to collaborate well as well. And then the last one I have on this one, and this is just, a lot of people talk about skills like this, but metacognition, which is knowledge about one's own strengths and weaknesses. You cannot improve anything about yourself until you first realize it needs improving. If you think you're the best mathematician in the world, you're never going to work too hard at learning new math skills. You have to realize you have issues, you have deficits, then you can address them. So these things are all skills. They're different from content. And I like to make this point with the next slide. This is an example I will often use. If you think about something like karate, you can learn a lot about karate in an hour or two. You could go to a session, you could learn the history of the sport, you could learn what the outfits are called, you could learn what the various moves are, all sorts of content, information you can get just by passively being subjected to it. But skills are different. If you want to do karate, if you want to become good at karate, you're not going to do that in a 2-hour information session. You're only going to do that by repeated, structured practice. You do karate badly at first, better, 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 better over time. So here's the challenge for educators, especially educators who have 1,900 students or 1,800 students at a time. Actually, just stay, well, okay. How do we give our students repeated, structured practice at these skills? How do we find the time? What is the actual mechanism we use? So that was my challenge with my course, and it's a challenge that I think all educators face, irrespective of the class context you're in. So we have now set up and created the so-called Advanced Learning Technologies Lab at University of Toronto. And our goal is, I've kind of got the stairway here. The idea is we all know what we want, where we want to get now in education, I think. We want to give our student these skills, training with these skills, in addition to the information. But how do we get there from here? So what are the devices we can use? We want to be the answer to that question to some extent. We want to provide educators with tools that can help them get there. And the one we're going to talk about today is something called PeerScholar. It harnesses something called peer assessment to do that. Generally, though, all of our tools embrace this notion that we call assessment for learning. The idea here is the following. We often think of assessments, tests, as measuring previous learning. So learning happens, and then we give our students a test to see how much learning they've actually absorbed. That's sometimes called assessment of learning. But a different idea now that's gathering a lot of strength is the idea that students are never more engaged, they're never paying more attention to your course than when you're testing them. That's when you have their minds fully. Their marks are on the line, they're paying attention. So that is perhaps the optimal learning situation. We use the assessments as a tool for supporting learning. Okay, assessment for learning. Yeah, go ahead. We need this engagement. No matter what we do, if students aren't engaged, it doesn't matter what we do. It's the front door to learning. All right, so let me step back for a second here. Let me just ask, first of all, any questions or thoughts so far? Preamble? All right. So, this is a little bit of what you're going to kind of see today with respect to PeerScholar. And it's the principles that we try to put into everything we build. And it's just touchstones we can think about as we go through. So, and it's also to some extent my opinion about if I were looking for educational technologies, what are the attributes optimally that those technologies would have? The first one I talk about is that it's purpose-built. Now, this isn't critical, but I think it's really important, and it's certainly something we believe in strongly. What we mean by this is the following. You can go out and take a technology that exists for some other purpose and use it for education. And I'm not suggesting that's bad. I do that myself. I used Wikipedia. At times I use Facebook as a medium for students to interact with each other and interact with me. But I think the most powerful educational technologies are ones that were built for education based on educational research. So they're purpose-built to be classroom tools. Sometimes people call this evidence-based. I'm actually going to kind of split evidence-based into two parts. One is that fact that it's based on principles that we know work. And the next one is the second point here, that once we've taken these principles and put them into technology, we now have to do research on that technology. We have to make sure it's doing what we think it's doing. And to the extent it isn't, we modify, we evolve it. So I call that research honed. So purpose-built, research honed. So obviously research playing a big role. And then the next two, at least in North America, and I think this is very global, I know it's certainly true in Holland where PeerScholar is used quite widely. This notion of, sometimes it's called learning outcomes, sometimes 21st century skills, sometimes it comes as the 6 C's. Those kinds of things I was talking about, critical thinking, creative thinking, communication. When an optimal technology can directly map onto those things. It can say, here's how we're teaching our students to think critically. Here's the part of the technology that gives them that exercise. Here's the part that gives them the communication exercise. So I think in the modern world, it's very important that technologies do that. And then the final one, and this is a high bar. This is one that very few technologies reach. But the optimal technology wouldn't just exercise these skills. It would also give you the ability to assess the development of the skills as you're exercising them. So to both exercise and assess. So this is the optimal goal. This is what we shoot for with the technologies we create. And so now let me just tell you about one of them and give you a sense of how it works. So we'll go to PeerScholar. There we are. That's our logo. Looks cool. Okay. I sometimes jokingly call PeerScholar the multivitamin of learning objectives. Multivitamin is something that gives you a little bit of everything your body needs. The claim of PeerScholar is that no matter what you want to teach your students, whichever of these skills, it can exercise, and I will argue, assess all of them. Some of them it does every time it's used. Others, it depends how you use it. But generally, it can. This is the baby we're most proud of because we think it literally kind of ticks every box. It hits every one of these. So let's just get much more explicit. All right, we're going to intermix this slide with a live demo because we want to give you the feel for the tool as it goes. And in fact, this first phase, the create phase, I'm not going to talk about too much, but let me just give you a very high-level overview, and then we'll get to the details and come back to this throughout. Generally speaking, in a PeerScholar assignment, students go through 3 steps. You're going right to the demo?
I'll prepare it while you're...
We're being collaborative here. The first step is what we call a create phase. I'm going to come back to the create phase. I'm not going to emphasize it too much now, other than to say students submit something. And it can be anything. For now, though, let's imagine they were asked to submit a written assignment of some sort. So they submit a written assignment by some date. They're given a rubric, specifically what to look for. They're given clear instructions about the assignment, but then they're asked, go ahead, do that assignment as well as you can. They then log back in for the second step, and let's just show you that live. This is where the peer assessment happens, and I want to spend some time making sure we're clear about the power of peer assessment, because in my opinion, it is perhaps the most powerful educational process that I've come across, at least, which is why we embrace it so strongly. Peer assessment just means this. In a traditional situation, we have all our students do something, they send it off usually to a teacher, and later they get it back. So the only work they've ever seen is their own. In the case of peer assessment, we say, no, that's not how we're going to do it. You guys are going to see the work that some of your peers submitted. And you're not just going to see it, you're going to be asked to assess it. We're going to put you in the teacher role and ask you, in a very, what we're going to call pro-social way, to give your fellow students comments. There's all sorts of advantages to peer assessment. Let me just show you how it works, and then we'll map onto some of those advantages. So in this case, what Dwayne's done is he's logged into the system. Students at the beginning of their peer assessment phase get instructions on what to do and how to do it, and the instructor can set all that up. But let's just go right to the give feedback. Then what they do is they see their peers' work. So in this case, we have an example where they're seeing 3 peers' assignments. Notice, by the way, it's anonymous. Generally speaking, that's very important for a couple of reasons. Most importantly, it escapes all the social pressures. If it's his work and we're buddies, we go out and have fun all the time, and now I know I'm assessing his work, it's hard for me to say anything negative because I know I have to look him in the eye, and it's very uncomfortable. But if I don't know it's his work, and if I know that he won't know it was me that gave the feedback, suddenly all the students are freed up to just do what they're supposed to do, which is to analyze the work well. And we typically ask them to do a few things, as we'll highlight. The first thing is, as they read through, they can add what we call inline comments, just by selecting text and adding some comment. This is usually just for things like sentence structure or grammar, kind of low-level writing attributes. Yeah. But more important than that, at the bottom, and this is all, you can change this to be whatever you want. But to give you an example, here's how we typically do it. We first ask students to rate the work they've seen. So they're reading 3 now. We say read all 3 first. Get a sense of how good they are. Now for each piece, rate how good it is. In this case, we have a star scale, but it could be anything. Highlight one thing this person is doing well, because we want them to continue doing that. So make sure they understand, your first sentence was very powerful, and I understood exactly where you were going. That was really good. So that's cool. But most importantly is the second one here. when I do these assignments, I usually use the following. I tell them, read through that piece, think of all the ways it could be better, but then zero in on the one thing that you think this person could change that would maximally improve their work. So what is that one big thing they could improve? Now, highlight that to them. Be very clear what the current problem is. That involves a lot of critical thought, as I'll come back to. But also then give them a good idea of how to improve. What do you think they should do? What direction do you think they should take to make their work better? Okay, so this is what I call pro-social. These are students trying to help each other improve their work. It's for this is one of the reasons students like this. They feel like they're getting support from their peers. Everyone's trying to help everyone get better. So they do that. Yeah, we give them a rubric that they have all through the process to help guide what they're looking for. You can provide that rubric however strongly you want to support that process. And if we come back to this slide for a second now, and I want to make sure if there's any questions on this, we get it. And we think of those learning objectives and the process I just told you about. You're looking at these and you're trying to figure out what's good, what's not so good, and what the problems are. That all involves critical thought, evaluation, assessment. So they're going through all of these things and thinking critically about it. They have to provide solutions to their peers, how to improve your work. That involves creative thought. They have to think up how this could be changed, how it could be improved. They, of course, have to communicate this all to their peers in clear ways that their peers understand. So expressive communication is being exercised. They're doing it in a collaborative way. They're doing it in a caring way, in a very pro-social way. And the last point I want to make, and then I'll come right to your question, is that they're doing all of this for an assignment they themselves did. And I think this is the most important thing to understand about peer assessment. It's one thing to submit a paper and eventually have a teacher come back and say, you're doing C work. You're just kind of average. It's something else to see your peers who are doing better than you and understanding for yourself, I'm doing average work. There are people in this class that are much better than I am. In the latter case, you feel it and you believe it. When it's an expert telling you, you sometimes think, what do they know? They're not right. Let me find something I can fight about, blah, blah, blah. So it's a very different experience, a different kind of learning. With peer assessment, you literally see that other people are better than you, and you see how they are better. And so you can learn very directly from the work of your peers. So yeah, let me stop there. Yeah.
What did the student give wrong feedback?
If they give wrong feedback? Yeah, okay. Excellent. So let's hold. So the question was, what if students give wrong, inaccurate, inappropriate feedback? Let's kind of jump to the third phase. And let me hold on to that for a second, and I will come to it. So let's show a demo of the third phase. While you are assessing your peers, so in that case 3 peers, it can be any number you want, a similar number of peers are assessing your work. And in the third phase,
The average of peers is like how many is for each one?
the average number of peers, completely up to you. So we will show you at the end of this how a teacher would set up one of these, how they would create an assignment, but that's completely up to you how many peers you use. If you want, so I'm going to tell you about 2 ways this system can be used. If you actually want the peer grades to count towards the mark, so that the mark that your peers give you, Dwayne has research. So by the way, I should have introduced.
That's good.
This is Dwayne Paré. Was my PhD student. He's now a faculty member at University of Toronto as well. His research, his master's work and his PhD work was all based on assessing PeerScholar in a number of ways, and we're going to show you some of that data. His master's research showed that if you average 5 or 6 peer grades, then that average is as reliable and valid as a single expert grade. So you can use the peer average as a grade and get out of grading yourself, which I say kind of with a smile. But there's valid reasons for that. Sometimes we want to give our students lots of experience writing. Sometimes we want a writing assignment every week. And if you have a very large class, that can seem impossible simply because you can't do all the grading. But if you're using the average peer grade, now you can do that. And they can learn a lot from each other, and you can have a lot of writing assignments, give them a lot of practice. But in that case, you would want 5 or 6 peers. Other than that, it's completely up to you. If you're going to do the grading at the end, and I'll talk about that in a moment, then it's completely up to you. Yeah.
Okay, maybe it's related to what
Sure.
Dr. Rahman mentioned. I think if you want to do any assessment, you need to train your whatever
Assessors.
assessors.
Yeah.
So that would probably take, if you want to make sure that they're doing the right assessment, that would take you know, good time to do it.
If you want them to be experts, you're right.
Could you repeat the question?
Yes, I'm sorry. So the question was, or the point being made was, if you want to be sure that the feedback that students are giving each other is really high quality feedback, then you're going to have to spend a lot of time training them ahead of time to give that high quality feedback. That is, if you want them to essentially become like teachers, you're going to have to train them to get to that level. What I'm going to argue to you is we don't want that. So let me be a little controversial right here now. Because here's the claim. I actually think sometimes we do our students a disservice by always giving them highly accurate expert feedback. Because what that does to their mind is make them followers, for lack of a better word. They are told from an expert, you have this and this problem and you should do this. And they assume, okay, I do have that problem and I should do that. They're not engaging their mind. With the peers, what we tell them instead, in this third phase, they're seeing this feedback that their peers have given them, and we tell them this feedback varies in terms of its quality. Some of it will be very good. Some of it will be not good. A critical skill you have to learn is to tell the good from the bad. How do you do that in this case? Well, somebody read your work and let's say they say, you use too many big words in your descriptions. You'd be better if you used more common words. Well, what I hope a student does is think about that, think about their work and say, do I use too many big words? Is that valid? What are the big words this person's reacting to? And are these big words like, I don't know, pneumonia or something like that I think people should know? And so ultimately, I want the students to think deeply about the feedback and to reject some of it. To learn that sometimes they're given feedback that is not good, is not appropriate. And so they engage those skills. So literally, in this third phase, you see the first step we're on here is reviewing the feedback. They now see the comments that students gave to their work. So this would now be like Dwayne was logging in and seeing his work, but he's now seeing what the 3 peers said about his work. And if he scrolls down, notice that thing that says usefulness. What we explicitly tell students to do here is exactly what we talked about. Think about that feedback. Think about your own work. Think about if you actually did what this person said. Do you feel your final product would be improved? If you do, then you should rate it as being very useful or useful, depending on how much you think it was improved. But if you don't, you should rate it as being non-useful. Yeah?
Would there be any verification of the usefulness of the comments by the instructor?
There certainly can be, yes. So again, there's 2 ways to use it. The way I prefer provides that. So in the way I prefer, the final step would be an instructor or a highly trained TA looking at the whole process, and I'll show you how they can do that, and assessing all of these things along the way. So they would exactly look at that. What are the feedback? Okay, Joordens, what did you tell your peers? How useful, so the instructor will see all this, how useful did they think your feedback was? But they could be wrong. Like you could be providing really good feedback and they just don't see it. They don't understand it. And so now the instructor can look at that, and ultimately part of the mark they can give is a mark based on the quality of the comments you gave to your peers. And that does not have to reflect what your peers thought. You know, that reflects what an expert thought. So I do think, as we kind of talk about some of these things, having an expert involved at the end of all this to sort out a lot of these issues we worry about is really good. You want an expert at the end to tease things apart. But during the process, what we're trying to create is sort of a gym for their mind, We're trying to get students to do all this critical thinking and creative thinking and communication involving all these. Then we can step back and say, okay, now I as an expert, here's how I thought you did on that. And let me give you some expert advice as well.
I have a question about psychomotor skills or tasks related to psychomotor and cognitive
Sure.
skills such as maybe engineering projects or
Yeah.
pharmacy or medicine. How to create a system?
Okay, so that's a broad question. Yeah, can I repeat it again? Okay. So
this
the
might
question
be a good time
was
to talk about the content and
the create side
phase.
of things. So we will probably jump to the create side of things because of this. So the question was, what about psychomotor skills? What about fields like engineering or pharmacy where the students are learning actual skills, like things they will employ in their occupation afterwards? How could you use peer assessment in that kind of context? So you want to go back to the slide with the
Sure.
with the learning outcomes kind of highlighted. I've been talking so far a lot about the second and I'm sorry, the one you were on.
Oh,
I keep wanting to reach for that coffee mug, which is not mine. I'm gonna move this one over here. There we go. Before it happens. No, I'm sorry. Yes. Okay. So I've been focusing on these two sides, but we haven't talked much about the create side, which I want to kind of go towards because you can do just about anything there. So if I think of an engineering example, I will try an engineering example. You could, for example, have your students watch a video of somebody building something, if it was that sort of engineering. So they're building something, and maybe the students have to identify 5 things this person is doing incorrectly. So they have to watch the video and try to find those things that the person isn't doing right, and then write a piece about that. That's what they're writing about. Now they're peer assessing each other's work. And so maybe I saw 5 things, but you're seeing different things. And now I go back to the video and I think, oh, was that, did I miss that one or did I not miss that one? And so we're giving each other comments. Maybe you say the person did something wrong, but I don't think they did anything wrong. So now I can react to your evaluation and assessment of that. Pharmacy, wow, okay. I don't know if we can do examples on the fly. I will give you one concrete example that is sort of like that, but not quite. But at a community college here, Centennial College, they're using it in their paramedics program. And one of the issues, so these are people who are what we call, sort of first-line healthcare providers. So you have a heart attack in your home, they are the people that come to your home and try to help you. And so they're being trained how to do this. One of their projects was a project that tried to enhance what we call their cultural sensitivity. If you're walking into a home and that home has a different culture or a different religion, what do you have to know about that culture or religion to be able to do your job well? And your job is to help the person in need. And so you certainly don't want to be insulting people along the way. You don't want to be engaging in behaviors that are causing problems. You want to be respectful to the culture you're within. So one of their projects is to pick a culture and talk about, if I was going into a Chinese home, and specifically, perhaps a subgroup of Chinese people, if I was going into that home, these are the things I should know about what I should be doing and what I shouldn't be doing. Now, students do that assignment now using PeerScholar, but then they also assess what 5 of their peers did, which means that they may have focused on the Chinese culture, but then somebody else might be talking about an Indian culture. And so now, in assessing their peers' work, they have to learn about Indian culture norms and apply those. And so now they ultimately learn about 5 or 6 cultures, which is good because they're going to probably visit every one of those cultures in their day-to-day job. So it's a good way of giving them a broader experience, I think. Did you have a specific example that you'd like to give me that I could try to work with?
No, but I'm trying
Yep.
to, let's say, for example, heart surgery.
Ah.
Can that be assessed in an essay or?
Well, so first of all, it need not be an essay. It can be a case study, and it certainly can be a video. It can be a picture, and it can also be a file. Like, I don't know if such a thing exists, but I bet it does. I bet there's some sort of simulation thing for heart surgery. If every student had that package on their computer, then they could run a simulation and upload it, so they could do heart surgery on the simulation, save that, upload it, and then as long as you have the same program, you could download it, see what they did, comment on that, react to it. So it need not be written compositions. It can be any digital file that they send back and forth. But one of the points you really make me want to touch on now, even though it's a bit of a departure, is a lot of this involves creativity on the part of the instructor. So how can an instructor think, how can I really maximize the use of this tool? And one of the things we're building into PeerScholar that I think is very important is the ability to share assignments. So let's say an engineering instructor at the University of Waterloo comes up with some assignment that's really, really good, really powerful, shares it with the world. Then somebody else in Saudi Arabia may say, hey, I'm interested in that assignment. I see it's very well rated. And you can actually load that assignment right into PeerScholar, make any modifications you would need to make it fit your current context. And now what we have are those instructors who are spending the time to come up with really creative, effective assignments. Those assignments are not now just helping their class. They may be spreading to classes all over the world. So to some extent, we're harnessing our best minds at your level, at the faculty level, and really allowing those really creative, ingenious faculty members to have a wide-ranging influence, even on the faculty members who might not be quite so creative. They can borrow and share these things. So, but that becomes the fun thing. How can I use this? How can I harness this?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's similar. It's a way of approaching the same question, maybe from a different perspective.
Okay.
Would you say that PeerScholar is as beneficial a tool in all disciplines? Like, is it, or is it better suited to arts and social sciences as opposed to?
Yeah. Yeah. We call it content agnostic, and what we mean by that is what PeerScholar really supports is this process, the one you see kind of highlighted behind you. And let me actually highlight, we'll go to the Amplify. Whatever you now embed in this process literally becomes amplified. So let me make an example of that to try to really push this barrier a little bit in a number of ways. Let's say we wanted to do this with very young children. Like some people say, is this a U of T student kind of tool? And we want to say, no, not at all. What if we asked every child to draw a picture of their teacher? So think of 6, 7-year-old children. Draw a picture of your teacher, maybe on an iPad or something like that, using some sort of software, or maybe just pencil and paper if we can scan them in. But draw a picture of your teacher. Now they log on again and they see examples of what their peers have done. And we ask them, who's doing the best picture and why? Justify what could this person change about their picture to make it better. Maybe they missed the bright yellow curly hair somehow on the instructor, and they say, well, you should include the bright yellow curly hair in your revision. Very young children, we can involve them in these mental processes, but we can come to them, and whatever we ask them to do, we're now amplifying. So in this case, it's drawing. We're getting students to think about pictorial representations. But we're getting them to think critically about each other's. We're getting them to communicate about that. If it's an engineering example, if it's heart attacks, now they're thinking critically about heart surgery. They're communicating about heart surgery. They're working collaboratively about that. So whatever you choose as an assignment, that all gets amplified by this process, and it really fits anywhere. I've yet to find challenges, certainly used in business, astrophysics, chemistry, certainly English.
The other interesting ones, I think, are the arts. There are a lot of images that are used to that people upload and exchange information and feedback on.
It's used. Let me give you my favorite example that I used this morning too. I like this one because it just shows the potential. Let's say you're worried about oral presentation skills, and you would like to teach it in your curriculum. But most of us say, well, we can't teach that till later on, at least at U of T, because classes are so big, they don't get small until later. So we can't, like 1,800 students in my class, are you going to ask students to come give an oral presentation? How are you going to do that with 1,800 students? Here's how we do it. We tell them to go home with one of these and videotape themselves giving a 5-minute argument about something. So now they're working on that oral presentation without everybody staring at them, by the way, which is very helpful early on. So they can just focus on that. They submit that video, and now they go through this whole process, assessing other submitters. What did they do well? What did they not do well? They get comments about theirs, and they get to revise. They get a second chance to improve their video. Suddenly, with 1,900, 1,800 students, I can have them working on oral presentation skills in an online environment. And again, they're thinking critically about oral presentations, they're thinking creatively about it, they're communicating about it, so everything gets amped up. It does, by the way, have a math editor built in. People are using it in the mathematics. I would love to see how they use it in the mathematics, because
I use it in my statistics class.
Yeah, Dwayne uses stats.
So it does kind of go across these curriculum that, but again, like Steve mentioned, it's really based on the ideas that you have to bring in.
Yeah.
Case studies are a great one for business, and as well as some of the other disciplines.
Yeah. Maybe I'll just do that one more hardcore example to show you the flexibility, and also just to hit on this point a little bit more. It's used a lot at the Rotman School of Business at U of T. You can have it set up in what's called an A-B model, which means that half the students are working on case A, half of them are working on case B, so that's what they write about. But then we have the people who are writing about B assess the A's, and the people who are writing about A assess the B's. So first of all, that means they now have to know two cases. They have to understand two cases. But secondly, that means they can't just steal each other's ideas easily either. I can sort of steal ideas, but in a good way, if stealing can be in a good way. I'm working on case A, so I'm thinking about one business context. Then I see somebody else writing about case B, where they come up with a really clever idea in the context of case B. Maybe I can then say, wow, could I apply that in my context? Could I take a similar kind of notion and come up with a way to make it work for my business context? That's what I consider good stealing. That's what we all want to do, learn from each other and grab on effective strategies that work and borrow those strategies and apply them in a new context. So they will use it in that way in business context. So certainly much more wide. It's not a writing tool. It's much more about engaging the mind in those ways. Yeah.
Does the instructor have to see everything the student write as evaluation for others?
Do they have to?
Yeah.
No, but maybe show them the student progress part. But sometimes they want to. So you certainly, it's always tricky, depending on the model you use. If you use the model where students' average grades count, you could technically do very little as an instructor. Other than creating the assignment, you could just essentially leave it to the students from there. But you can do as much or as little as you want. So Dwayne's going to show you in this is a live course, eh?
This is my course.
Yeah, okay. So hit student progress on something. Do you have anything ongoing? No, it doesn't really matter. But what we're showing you here is just at any point in the process, you can see an explicit list of the students and what they've done as they go. So as students actually do things, you will see this table populate. And at any point, you can view comments. So there are times when, for example, teachers like to view the feedback that students are giving to each other before the students see the feedback that was given to them. That sounded very complicated, I'm sorry. But the idea might be this. Some teachers are worried, especially at certain age groups, especially in certain teaching contexts, that maybe some students may say something inappropriate. So before they allow these comments to be seen, they want to see them themselves, and they want to potentially remove any offensive comments. And so you can do that simply by leaving a space between the assess phase and the reflect phase. You leave a day or two, and during that day or two, you can look at all of that information. You can flag things that are inappropriate. So you can have a lot of oversight if you want, or you can just let it run if you want.
So what would be the incentive for the reviewer to really spend
Yeah.
time to evaluate others' work?
Yeah. Do you evaluate the same way I do? Can you just show your do you have those four?
So mine are, no, I evaluate differently because this is a presentation
Can you log
model.
into mine?
We may have to edit out the student names from the video.
Oh yes, yes, we may want to.
Do you want to?
Sorry, we shouldn't be sharing student names in this way. Yeah.
Does the instructor have access to the original?
Yes. To the first draft?
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, you have.
See how well is the other students
Yes.
correct?
Let me show you. I'll show you right now, and I think you'll see this really well. So this is assignments in my class. And we're just going to show you now. So now we've kind of jumped away. So let me make sure everyone's clear of the jump we made. We were looking at what the students saw. Now we're looking at the instructor side. Okay, so there's a number of things we can show you about the instructor side, but what I want to show you right now is what an instructor sees when they're grading the assignments. So first of all, here's that list again. But if you just, I guess, go to anybody's final grade. When you're actually assessing a student, we've created an interface that allows you to see everything we think you would want to see kind of at a glance. So the first thing I want to show you is hit the teacher's grade part there. You can set up, this is an answer to the first question that came, you can set up various criteria. If you're using the entire model where students get feedback and then submit a revision, which is what I do, then you can set up your grading in the way I have very easily. So in my case, you can see the weights beside it. The draft, the first thing they submitted is worth 2 points. The final thing they submit is worth 4 points. So the thing I want to stress about that is those are the products of the student's work. Okay, and that's normally what we grade, but that's normally kind of all we grade. The next two are the process. So the first one, quality of comments given to peers. So what's the incentive for them to do this right? 3 marks out of 12 is my sort of crass answer, I guess. But literally, there's 2 incentives. I shouldn't be so crass as to throw everything on marks. We literally have a little bit of a soapbox video. I call the soapboxes when I get up and give some spiel about why you should do this. It's really good. In this case, I literally say, you want to give each other really good comments. When you get that feedback back from your peers, you're hoping they spent the time and effort to give you good stuff you can use. And therefore, you need to do the same for them. And so literally by stressing the importance of it and how it all works, that's important. But we also add this to the grades. Where are you now? You're all, oh. Okay.
Sorry, I was just going to...
So Dwayne's just showing you up here how you would do that to give you a sense. As an instructor, when you create your assignment, you can specify all the criteria you want and how many points you want to assign to each of them. So that's what I use. And also, by the way, if you slide down a bit and do that slider thing, notice up top there's the instructor grade and the average peer grade. You can choose to blend those two in various ways. If you want the students' grades that they give each other to be part of the mark, you can have those as part of the mark, but your part as another part of the mark, and you can determine how much of that you want to mix. And you can specify what your part of the mark is in detail. So, what specifically was your question? I want to make sure I answered the question from there, but okay, we'll go.
How do you, the LMS, different LMS have a similar tool called peer assessment.
Okay.
Like Moodle, for example. I think that works, I believe, have same idea.
Yeah.
Have you evaluated the peer assessment in LMS and compared it with its system features, and what is convincing? How you convince us to use this system instead of using the assessments?
Well, I could do one. I don't want to be mean, but has anybody tried to use one of those systems, like the Blackboard one? No, no one's tried. They're not very well developed. So often they're developed as sort of add-ons. I don't think they all understand the power of peer assessment as I've kind of instructed you guys. So they build these tools. Turnitin has one too, but they kind of suggest students before they turn in their essay could give each other advice. But they build it as a small add-on. For us, it's literally the meat and potatoes. So in terms of the features, the ability to do the kinds of things we're showing you now, specifying all your criteria for feedback and the control over the process and the ability to watch it all, there's nothing that'll really come close. So that's one.
It's clearly, it's more features here.
Yeah.
But how do you link it together?
Yeah, well, and I mean, the other thing I would say is just that evidence base. So there's no doubt that their tools are also based on peer assessment, and there's a strong research base that says peer assessment works. So if I step back a little bit, I would say if all of you guys choose to use any peer assessment device, I think that's fantastic for today. Like, I think these things should be out there and they should be widely used. And if it's PeerScholar or the competition, fantastic, great. But nobody else has put the effort into both the feature set but also the research that we do on it. So everything within PeerScholar, we've got data to back up, and we've actually changed some of that. We have a whole set of best practices we suggest. So when you, I guess the notion would be when you're using PeerScholar, you become part of this community that is a community driven by educators. So these are people who care about education. I'm an educator. I'm not a software engineer. We're learning this as we go, the software engineering part. But I'm an educator. And so I think that's the different perspective. You know, when you're dealing with Blackboard, they're building a tool that the market wants, and they're trying to figure out what the market is. We are the market. So we're building a tool we want that works for us, and then sharing it with other educators.
Yes.
So I think that would be the distinction.
There is something that I would like to address, which is the assessors themselves as
Yes.
learners in a collaborative learning environment.
Yeah.
They learn while they assess.
Yes, absolutely.
From your experience, what is the amount of learning that they gain from this?
I think this is a very good point and a lead into our research.
Yeah.
we have it set up, so I think it's a good one to start with.
So let's
it'll
start
address
by,
that, I
by
think, as
telling
well.
you about a study. Are we doing that one first?
I think this was we can start.
Jump ahead to the other one, just because it's directly related to what he said. So I want to jump ahead to this one. So let me tell you about a research study that, because we worry about some of these things as well. I've been emphasizing in PeerScholar the peer assessment part, and that's an important part. But there's two other things we also have built into the system. One is self-assessment, occasionally asking students to assess their own work, especially while they're assessing other people's work, is also a very useful educational thing to do. It makes them think about their own work. And also, I'll just add this third one, formative assessment, the idea of them not just getting feedback, but immediately putting it to work, like they do in PeerScholar, is a very powerful educational concept. So really, there's nothing new in PeerScholar. It just combines these three things. But let's now think about the self-assessment. What is students learning about themselves as they assess others? So in this experiment, we had people, let's imagine we're talking about this person named Sue here. When she submitted her original work, we asked her to assess the quality of her own work. What grade would you give yourself now that you're submitting? What do you think this is? And she says she thinks it's a 9. Well, let's say when she's assessed by her peers or by an expert, they think she's a 6. So she has an error in her estimation of about 3 points, okay, previous to peer assessment. Now, if peer assessment is helping her learn about herself, we might expect something like this. After she assesses her peers, we could ask her the same question. Okay, you've just been through peer assessment, you've just been looking at your peers' work, now look at your work again. And with fresh eyes, think about it. Now what mark do you think it deserves? And if the world is good, she'll get much more realistic. She'll come closer to, why does that say 9? That should say 6, by the way. I just noticed. But she will come closer to what the experts or the average peer grade gives her. So we did exactly that study, and this is the actual data we found. So for students who submitted work, and if their actual grade was a 6.7, which it was for these students, when we asked them before they peer assessed, what do you think your work is worth? Look at that. They said 8.2. But after one session of peer assessment, so they had just, in this case, looked at 5 of their peers' work, they assessed those peers' works, and now we said, okay, now look back at your own. What do you think it's worth now? The average is now 7.7. That's almost a 40% drop in their error of assessing their own work. So that's, this is sort of kind of answers all these things. With peer assessment, we've done the work to show that it is actually having an impact. A couple of points important about this. One is it shows that. It shows they're learning to better find the faults in their own work by peer assessing. The other thing, though, that I think is really critical that we want to highlight is we can, to some extent now, assess their metacognitive abilities on the fly as they do the assignment. So we're not doing some external assessment once a year to see what our students' skills are. We're assessing them every time they do an assessment. Bring that back to the gym kind of thing, and then we'll go to critical thinking. Yeah. This has become a really critical part of what we do. Again, all of this answering what we do is why what we do is how is it different from what other people do. We are, in the current climate, it's really easy to say, here are the skills we want. We want critical thinking, we want creative thinking, we want communication. I've been on the committees that have come up with those definitions of so-called learning outcomes. Every one of those committees is having a lot of fun until somebody in the room says, well, how do we assess these things? You know, how do we know if we're actually doing that? And then everyone goes, oh, I don't know. And so I was in that room and I said, well, okay, if we want to be a technology that's really helpful for professionals, it's not enough to exercise these skills. We have to try to assess them as well. With that one experiment, you got a sense of how we could assess metacognition. Let me get a little more cocky and tell you how we think we can assess something at least related to critical thinking. Okay, critical thinking is probably the holy grail of learning outcomes. We hope our students will learn to think critically. So here's an example of how we try to quantify that in PeerScholar. We're now going to assess me, Steve. How good am I at thinking critically? We can look at one of the people I assessed to start with and say, okay, I assessed Sue and I said her work deserved a 7. What did everybody else think her work deserved? So we could take either, again, a peer average or an expert mark, and we could say, well, everybody else thought it was a 9. I thought it was a 7, so I was off by 2. Now I'm not just assessing Sue, I'm assessing 5 other people. So we can do the same thing with everybody I assess, and we can come to a number that essentially represents how well my grades match with the actual quality of the pieces I'm grading. So am I really good at telling the good quality work from the poor quality work? How good am I at doing that? We're claiming this is a measure that's at least related to that concept we all call critical thinking, the ability to assess the actual quality of a piece. And in one of our research projects, we had, let me make sure this is clear because it's a little complicated. We had a course where it's introductory psychology. It had a part 1 in the fall, which is where those first 2 bars come from, and then it had a part 2 in the winter, which is the second set of bars. People could take part 2 without taking part 1. Most people don't. Most people carried on from part 1. So with the orange bars, what we're showing here are those people that carried on, and we're showing the error in their grades, in a sense, the accuracy of their grading of their peers. And what we see is a nice linear drop. The more experience they get with peer assessment, the more the accuracy of their grading improves. So they're actually becoming better at doing this. And especially if we look at this group that, for the blue bar, this was the first time they did PeerScholar, even though they've been in university just as long as the other people. This was their first time, and you see that their error rate is right where the others started. So again, 2 things to take from this. One is peer assessment works, at least as employed within PeerScholar. It's working. It's seemingly enhancing students' ability to figure out what's good and what's not so good. The second, though, I think is almost more important. This is how a tool like this can now be used. Because it's assessing, as the students are doing the assignment, we can, as educators, know, hey, these assignments are improving their critical thinking scores. And then we can come back to a question like, how could this be used in the engineering field? Does it work? Well, we can ask that very explicitly. We can compute the numbers. We can look at our programs and overall and say, how are students' critical thinking skills developing as they go through our program? This is sometimes very important for justifying funding, but also for just making good decisions. So I think this is, if you remember my criteria for educational technologies, this is sort of number 4, which I think is really hard to reach, which is technology that not only gives our students experience with the skills they need, but also assesses how they are doing. To tie that analogy together, the reason we sometimes call this taking learning outcomes to the gym is we imagine a situation where somebody's going to a gym. Let's say I want stronger shoulders. I want big shoulders even without the suit jacket on. So I would like my shoulders to be bigger. I can go to the gym every week and lift weights over my head, and I'm pretty sure from everything I've heard that'll make my shoulders bigger. But I don't have to trust that, right? Because as I go and I engage in this exercise, I should see over time that the amount of weight I can lift or the number of repetitions I can do should increase. So as I'm exercising, I'm not just exercising, I'm also getting a good snapshot of where my muscles are. And over time, I expect that the amount of weight will increase and increase and increase, which will tell me, yes, this exercise is worth it. I am getting my muscles stronger the way I want. That's what we want PeerScholar to be, a tool that exercises and assesses and kind of fits in both of those places.
Yes.
Yeah.
How much knowledge do you think the learners, students, should know about the technology itself?
The technology itself, our problem is not with the students. So generally, we've had almost no problems with students in terms of this for them is pretty straightforward. I mean, everything, when they walk through the system, I think as you noticed, there was that little green sort of path along the top. So they just kind of go in a linear order, and they have no problem. The bigger challenge, and it's not that big a challenge either, but the bigger challenge is the faculty members, making them comfortable with this technology, and eventually learning how to really create powerful assignments. You can, by the way, one of my other favorite phrases is, you hear the comment that good technology is disruptive. I don't really believe that. I like it to be disruptive in the sense that it gives a sudden more power, that it changes what we're able to do. But I don't like it meaning that everybody has to change the way they do everything. So in PeerScholar, you could take any assignment you already use, something you already do, put it in PeerScholar, add this peer assessment step, and suddenly it's a much more powerful assignment with very little change in you. But optimally, eventually a professor would look at this and say, okay, now how can I really maximize the power? And that's, I think, where the most potential lies, but also where we have to support faculty and really help them understand how to juice the best out of it.
And I think just to add, it sort of addresses their earlier question as well. So this study that we did, when we did it, we didn't have any training involved. So it was sort of seeing how students progress through time without, the formal training. And one of the conclusions is that they're actually learning, so not the technology itself, which was pretty seamless to implement, but they're learning the skills. And that is without the training step.
I mean, I'm sorry, but this is still really an interesting process.
Mm-hmm.
Two questions. Is that improvement increment that significant? We're talking about, what, 2%?
Oh, yeah.
And then the second question is, I'm assuming there's a pooled, improvement. I'm assuming that some students have really significantly improved, some did not.
Yes.
So would it make sense maybe to more focus on those who have more potential?
I can actually draw, so this one's one of my papers that right now I'm currently working on, so I'm sort of in depth in it. But there's two things that I'll address there, I think. One is we see that, so one of the ideas is, if everybody started giving the same marks, this error rate would decrease. So is that a problem? One thing we did with the analyses is looking at the actual range. So students are still giving the correct range, but it's just that they're more agreeing on the individual cases. So that's one way that we see that this is an actual evidence of what we're hoping it's evidence for. The second idea, I think that you're mentioning, is the difference in the students who maybe are poor have more room for growth, while the students who were originally doing well are sort of at the ceiling of the process. That is the case. So it's definitely, when there's not too much room to grow, when somebody's accurate right off the bat, they're going to be, stay pretty accurate. One thing is that it's very rare to have somebody who's accurate right away. So there's usually some growth with the students along the path. The other interesting thing is, even if there was somebody who's doing very well, and they're doing very well in terms of their writing piece or their assignment or their activity, the interesting thing is this whole process of being the teacher. It's a new experience. It's something that has benefits outside of this particular measure. We think that's very important for people to learn. Not only do you want to do the best you can, but that whole collaborative communication and community, you want to share that or be able to teach that or pass that along. So there's different levels that people can achieve, even the best students.
Yeah, let me kind of take the question two different directions too and answer it. So the first one, I just want to re-stress what Dwayne said. So sometimes the most intelligent students and the most high quality to begin with say, hey, wait a minute, you're putting me in this situation and all I feel like I'm doing is helping my peers. I don't feel like I'm getting very good feedback because they're all telling me my work's great already. But I'm helping them because their work isn't great. What we say to those students is, if you are as good as you think, then one of the skills you really need to learn is how to share your knowledge and how to work with others. And maybe you're more of a management type person down the road, so you're developing those skills, and those are really good skills for you. So it's not always about the assignment. Specifically, it's about skills. But if you're suggesting that, well, let me say it this way. Another nice thing about this measure is, imagine you had an assignment and you said, man, these people at U of T say that critical thinking skills are supposed to be getting better, but I've done my assignments and they're not changing, and they're always really bad. People aren't doing very well in my course. That might tie to something like engagement, like I talked about earlier. Maybe the assignments are not capturing the person's minds. And one of the great things about PeerScholar is the assignments can be anything. So for the students that just do not want to be in school, do not enjoy the school system, they enjoy something. If you can get at what they enjoy, do they enjoy football? If they enjoy, soccer or football or something like that, maybe you can harness that passion and say, okay, I want you to write an essay about who is the best football player. I don't know if you guys call it football or soccer. Football? So, yeah, especially nowadays. So if you said, who's the best footballer? You pick, but you have to justify that. You have to try to convince somebody else that the person you're picking is the best. So I want you to work on your critical thinking. I want you to work on your arguing. I want you to work on your communication. But let's do it in an area that you enjoy doing that. And now with something like PeerScholar, you can do that. You can take the learning to them because you're not so worried about the content. You're more worried about the skills. And I think if I were in a classroom and I saw, some students just aren't taking off, that's where my mind would go first, is can I make a more engaging assignment, and then let's see. And with PeerScholar, you're free to kind of do that.
Do you have the,
Oh, I'm sorry. Is there a certain order? That?
No, just somebody's been asking.
Oh.
I could argue with you here, but you can correct me. if
Sure.
I'm wrong.
Yep.
I take it that PeerScholar is just assessing the higher thinking of the cognitive facet of the learning domain, ignore maybe the higher psychomotor skill and affective domain. And furthermore, it just assesses one aspect of the assessment, which is the written assignment. And you know that there are diversity of assessment formats.
Yeah. Okay, so let me kind of tie that back and see if we're, so let's say, the affective or cognitive domain. Again, an assignment could be about anything. So can you give me an example of an assignment you would normally do to try to give them a...
It's just written essay?
It need not be. It can be anything they can submit digitally. So it can literally be pictures, it can be videos, it can be sound files, it can be anything that you can digitally capture.
Yes.
And then they can share that. An example? Well, I mean, the one that I gave earlier, I don't know if we have any we can just show. I know in Holland they've got... Can you bring out? I don't know if you can bring out one of those. But in Holland, they spend a lot of time with young kids, having them do projects in which they are reenacting something. So I'm really trying to. I'm struggling in my mind to get at that affective kind of, to think of an assignment that would work with that. But certainly, you can have them, watching videos and reacting to them, submitting videos of some sort. So whatever you want. We're taking all these high-level cognitive skills, you're right, that's what most of it does, but we're applying them to something. And it can be applied to anything you want to apply it to. So if the assignment is one that focuses on some other domain, the cognitive affective domain, for example, now they're going to be critically thinking about that domain. So they will be applying these high-level cognitive skills, but they'll be applying them to that subject matter, which I think, yeah, I don't know how easy it will be to find.
This is not, you do not only assess your students using PeerScholar.
Oh, no. I'm sorry. If that was a confusion, let me be clear. In my course, for example, the PeerScholar grade is worth 12% of 100%. So we also, like, it's not, I'm not, thank you if I gave this impression, I'm not suggesting content is irrelevant and we should throw it out. We still assess all their content. Have they learned the critical theories? Have they learned all that kind of stuff? So that's still a core part of the course. This just allows me to also have a part of the course that does focus on these high-level cognitive skills. So yeah, I'm sorry if I gave that impression. It was really, at least in North America, we had kind of tilted to the point where in some of our big classes especially, all we were really assessing was content. And that was it. And there was very little in these other assessments. So we've kind of used PeerScholar to shift that back a little. But certainly not, I would never argue that content is irrelevant. In fact, content is sometimes best learned when you put them in one of these critical thinking situations.
So this is just an example, sorry, of it's a Dutch school that's doing using PeerScholar, but they're using videos, and they're actually learning a second language. So they have conversations in this language, and they do a reenactment video, and that is their assignment. So they upload the videos. We're integrated with YouTube as well, so that's where the videos are hosted, but it's within PeerScholar, and so they can watch their peers' videos and comment and give feedback on the language they're using and how they can follow the conversation. So this is just one example that we have, but it's students talking with no sound.
Yeah.
Steve, could I ask about an example? Like let's say at University of Waterloo, we have applied health sciences faculty, and within that there's kinesiology. And so there's some courses about dealing with sports medicine. Yep. So one of the things that I think the students are sometimes taught is, you know, if someone strains an ankle, how to wrap it.
Yep.
So in that kind of course, perhaps you could have students going through the process of wrapping someone's ankle as if it were sprained, have that videotaped, that would then get uploaded,
yep.
and then that would become the content that the other students would
give feedback. Yes.
Yes. Yeah, you can certainly do that. So if you want to make something a target piece of an assignment, you can make like a video like that. So that's the target. Watch this video. And again, maybe, you know, point out the things they're not doing right. Or something like that to engage the mind a little bit more than just having them see it. So I'm going to go here and then I'll go here. Yeah.
I just want to go back to the same thing our sister was talking about.
Yeah.
Now, at the very beginning, you listed 6 or 7 C's.
Yes.
And you said these are what the whole technology is built to, assist the learners and their outcomes to be.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's not clear to me yet how can we measure the improvement in these areas, beside, of course, the feedback learning to the students from each other, to the learners from each other.
Right. So can you go to that first, the 7 or the C's slide? So what we're claiming, and this is early days, I have to say, you know, we're just starting to do this, and a lot of people don't have this assessment piece, but what we would claim is, if you think of the PeerScholar process we've described so far, especially the full one, where an expert is ultimately evaluating things at the end, critical thinking, I've given you a sense of how we can measure that, perhaps. Creative thinking, that's trickier, but imagine that you, at the end, imagine you give your students some creative thinking kind of exercise. In psychology, they have silly little creative thinking things, like they will say, okay, here's something. Tell me all the different things you can imagine using this for. So there's the obvious thing of entering input, but there's, you know, it could prop a door open. It could hit somebody over the head with it, maybe. It could, you know, you can try to think of everything you can think of to do with this. So you could give students that assignment. Ultimately, you're going to grade that assignment. So now, in some of these cases, we are still going to rely on the expert, but with those broken down grades, if one of them was how creative was the ideas that were presented, and you provide a grade, now we have a measure of creative thinking. Communication, remember that measure, the quality of the comments that a student gives to their peers. You're going to evaluate that. You're going to look at that. And that's going to be a measure now of their expressive communication. Receptive communication, the appropriateness of their revision. How well did they revise their work given the comments they received? Again, that's one of the things you're going to evaluate, so you'll have the measure of that. Collaboration, I agree. I don't know how you measure collaboration so well.
We have our sense of community research.
We have measured it using something called the Community of Inquiry Scale, and we've shown this improvement.
On the system.
Well,
these measurements are not built in the system.
As a fall, so
depends on his ability to evaluate or assess.
Yes. As of the fall, we will be outputting the metacognitive one, which is that one I showed you, the difference between self-assessment and actual, and the critical thinking one. And when you, as an instructor, specify those criteria, you're going to be able to say, this is a learning outcome. So this criteria, let's say, how creative was the idea? You can say, that's a learning outcome, I want to label that creativity. And then you'll be able to output a report that documents that. And we ultimately want to, this is a promise now, this isn't there now, but we ultimately want to build an analysis system around that would allow you now to track students across different courses and become a tool that administrators could use to watch these things grow. So I agree to an extent, some of this is a promissory note, but when we ask questions like how are we different than Blackboard, I can almost guarantee you that Blackboard is not having any of these thoughts because they're not part of this community. They may have these thoughts when they see us doing it, but I think that's literally the way things are going to unfold is as we improve and enhance, our competitors are going to say, hey, that's good ideas, and they'll be with us.
Does PeerScholar integrate with Blackboard?
Yes. Yeah. So it's integrated with Blackboard.
Moodle.
It's currently in final testings for Moodle and D2L. I don't know what's used in your institution. Blackboard. Oh, okay. Blackboard set. So Blackboard has single sign-on, has mark flow back to the grade book, and has calendar integration. And we didn't talk about it too much. We kind of alluded a little bit, that idea of having students grouped into different groups where you treat them a little differently in the different groups. It can inherit that from Blackboard. So if you already had different tutorial groups set up and you wanted to somehow treat them differently, it can inherit that grouping, which can be really useful for research. Sometimes you want to do some research yourself. Yeah?
Does this system or site support other languages like Arabic?
So it supports Dutch, literally. We've got a lot of users in Holland, and so we've been working really hard. I don't know if you want to just, can you toggle the interface to show I'm not lying there? But we've literally gone through the process. But this is good news because the process we had to go through to make it a Dutch interface was one where let me just say it this way. We created a process that allows us to much more easily turn it into other languages. Now, Arabic is going to be tricky because Arabic isn't just a question of the language. There's some interface flipping and stuff we want to do. So, to really make it a true Arabic interface, we would have a little bit of work to do. There's no doubt. But, give us the right justification and we'll do it. I'm sorry?
Definitely.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Our plan is world domination. but I mean that in a nice way. I mean, we literally, Dwayne and I used to joke about our delusions of grandeur in our office, but we used to say we really want to see this used by as many students as possible. And if we want to reach other cultural groups, we have to get it in their language. So, yeah.
I have maybe I will repeat my question, the last question.
Sure.
Does the instructor have to see everything on this website to read every evaluation?
No,
they don't have to.
Certainly not.
That's up to the instructor.
How do you know that the students interact with others?
So let me give you an example that I think answers some of that. So I, as the instructor, don't see every 1900 sets of comments, but my TAs do. So when my TAs grade, if you're going to grade, and especially, which I really like, if you're going to grade the quality of comments you're given, because another thing that people need, skill people need, is how to give feedback. I don't know if you read blogs and you see how people give feedback now. It tends to be horrible. They're just, criticizing, but never saying anything useful. So we want to teach students that skill, I think, too, how to give effective feedback. So I like when somebody assesses the feedback. And you're right. In order to assess that well, you have to have eyes on it. You have to look at it.
But there is, so I will add that we have, and this sort of addresses the earlier question as well, we have these mechanisms built in. These are the algorithms that we've programmed to measure. And so a lot of the research we're doing, when we do find things that are effective, we implement it into the program such that it can be exported as a report or whatnot. The usefulness ratings, so there are things that you can build in if you completely wanted an automated process where there were no eyes on the assessments. For example, you can build in so that the usefulness rating is part of the mark. So that if somebody's feedback is always rated as not useful, that will determine a mark of 0 out of 3, for example. And that is a component of their automated grade. So it is this balance between, do you want to have some involvement, complete involvement, or very little involvement? And what we've shown is even with very little involvement, using the processes that we put into place, we're still getting reliable and valid grades. So that was the focus of the early research, is just the grade reliability and validity. And the current research is more the effectiveness and mapping onto these learning outcomes and actually showing that we're assessing this improvement over time.
One quick explicit answer to your comment. Yes, you have to put eyeballs on, but this is what I very quickly opened is the grading interface that a TA or an instructor would use to grade. And you see we've got it all together. So this is the information about the assess phase. And for this student, this would be the feedback the student received from the peers. And so you could very quickly look and say, okay, this is what peer 1 said about their work, peer 2, peer 3, etc. And this is, to your question, the feedback they gave. So if I wanted to assess your ability to give feedback to others, yes, I have to look at the comments you gave, but it's all right there. So I can very quickly say what you see to peer 2, and I can also say how useful did they find your comments.
If you have, for example, 200 students.
If you have 200 students.
You have 5 evaluations.
The other way,
it takes in our estimation, 10 to 12 minutes per student to do what I did. So mark the quality of the draft, the quality of the final product, the quality of the comments given to peers, and the appropriateness of the revision. It takes 10 to 12 minutes per student. So if you have large classes, that's why many people with large classes they use the usefulness ratings as Dwayne suggested in the average peer grade. So you can get out of all that, but I think to do a really rich expert assessment, you have to do that.
Yeah, you do have to do it with and you can use that as a flagging mechanism. So some people they don't grade all 1900, but they say, you know what, the top 50 who were really rated poorly are the ones I pay attention to. So you can kind of mix and match that as well. But that's really up to the instructor if they want to have hands-on everything or not.
Do you have statistics of how many people are using the system in categories? Science, humanities?
We don't have nice compiled ones, but we
do have the data, yes.
Yeah, we have the data. We could produce...
This is an offhand. So right now we have about what was our last measure? There's about 20 to 30,000 students using, and it was a lot were in the humanities and psychology. I think that was our primary
because that's where people know me.
Yeah, about a good half of that, but the rest were diverse across all these between colleges.
Accessibility to the program by the individuals, instructor, or it can be by the school?
You can do either.
All of the above. All of the above. So, I mean, often at the school level, when it's used at the school level, like in Holland, it's a school that purchases it at a very reasonable price, and then they have unlimited use for the school. At the university level, it often starts with faculty, like individual faculty saying, I want to use this in my class. We always hope it goes up to the administrative level, and that people in the administration say, hey, this is a good general tool that everybody can use, and then a site license can get involved, and it's just generally available to everybody. But any model that works can be adapted to.
Could I interject just for
Yes.
a second? It's 1:30 now, despite what that clock says. It is 1:30.
One final question.
We may allow that. I just want to point out at 2:30, I've arranged a webinar, so it has to begin at 2:30. So we have an hour for lunch. I want to point out that Steve and Dwayne and representatives from Pearson are going to be here for lunch. So you can ask them questions during lunch as well.
Definitely.
If you want to spend a little bit longer right now and you'll have a shorter lunch, I'll be round.
Can you put up the slide with our contact info?
We can do that.
No,
Salah, do you still want to ask your question?
Okay, actually, if I can just have two last words really quickly. Actually, if you can go to the previous slide. If you want more about what we said today, most of what I said today, previous slide. Oh, the HECO one? Yeah. If you Google Joordens HECO, there's a report. HECO is the Higher Education Quality Council of Ontario. There's a report that we did recently that basically follows the talk that we gave today. So if you want to revisit any of that, you can grab that online. And then next slide, if you want to contact us, these are some ways to contact us. Also, Dwayne at PeerScholar.com for Dwayne.
And I'll put links to that information on the website that we created for you. So thank you, Steve, very much.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.